All right. So in this video, we're going to hear a little bit about the pros and cons of UX research at Facebook. Every role has its ups and downs, its good things and its bad things. And so I'm curious, Meena, what are your favorite parts of your role?
I already alluded to this in the previous video is, talking to users is my happy spot when I get to hear from them firsthand what they feel about using our products. And then, of course, then when I'm running my studies and then just looking at the data that's coming in and then trying to identify the themes and create that storytelling narrative, if you will, like from what I'm seeing in terms of themes from the data I'm collecting. So those are all the happy parts, and then driving product strategy based on what I find and landing that anytime landing your work to make impact feels great, right? So those are all the positives and the highs.
Yeah, well, in that reality of I saw this potential from a person, and seeing like how they could use this and getting that out in the product and changing that. That's got to
Mhm.
feel really inspiring, right?
Yeah, and I also mentioned like having launched avatars, and it was trending on CNN and Google, and it went viral. And there were memes, obviously not as popular as the Bernie Sanders meme that came out, but it's been quite a journey.
Yeah, it's so fun. What are the
Yeah.
most challenging parts for you?
Um, Challenging parts would be anything like tactical, from maybe not having your research study land the way you wanted to, something going wrong during the study. So just being, one step ahead of that, because there's a lot of work that goes into bringing a user right in front of you to give you that feedback. There's so many steps, and, with the privacy, security issues, and, lots of boxes to check. And so when a study doesn't work out the way you had planned for it, that's a little disappointing. It's challenging. But I think, doing, as I mentioned, international research across time zones, that's another challenge. And especially if you're going to have to do it remote, you're relying on partners. How much contact do they have with your product? So there's different set of challenges there. And then, of course, keeping up with the fast-paced technology. Sometimes, there's a study I'd like to run based on some designs we're evaluating, but by the time I get through all the processes to get that study up and running, the design's already changed for whatever reason. So it's trying to find that balance of how do you keep up with the processes, of doing research plus, the pace at which the team wants findings. That has been my biggest challenge, I feel, especially at Facebook.
Yeah, well, and the complexity of getting one of these studies lined up
Mm-hmm.
relative to the design process, which often does
Mm-hmm.
iterate week over week,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? Where you've got a study that maybe takes multiple weeks or multiple months to get set up.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds
Right.
really hard.
And also, the nature of being on newsfeed. So think about the ecosystem impact, right? Like there's like a variety of factors that will affect that design or the decision. And sometimes you may not see it coming, and it may come last minute. It's like, well, no, you can't pivot that way. Oh, there's a privacy concern there. You can't do it that way. So that's just part of being in that whole newsfeed ecosystem also.
Yeah, almost navigating the complexity of the space, both
Mhm.
in terms of the users and what's going on there, and in terms of just the
Yeah.
entire product within which you're building, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that might be very different if we were working at a company where it's like, this is our first thing and we've never done this before, right? Like you've got something that's out there in the world and that already has interactions. So that almost
Absolutely.
increases the complexity for you.
Absolutely.
Nice. I'm curious, what's one thing you wish you had known earlier, right, in your career?
Hmm. Um, I guess for as a UX researcher, I would have loved to know how much work goes not just in the study or during the study, but it's the post study to make sure your findings land for impact. How much time you will have to spend driving that alignment, and expectations with, your XFN. There's a lot to do to evangelize your own findings. So yeah, I wish I'd known that.
Yeah, well, and it really is often if you're a UX researcher, you're passionate about, like you were saying, creating experiences. You're passionate about that, understanding people, the like influence and the creating impact and almost
Mhm.
marketing and PR for your own work. That's
Mhm.
not often where you've come at it in terms of motivation. but
Mhm.
you need it to land your work, right?
Absolutely. And that's not something they teach you in school either.
Oh gosh, no. Wouldn't that be nice? All right, here's how to influence in a large corporate environment. Yeah. You almost just have to figure it out. And each
You
each
have to figure
team
it
and
out.
each company has a slightly different way that that process operates. So you have to
Yeah.
learn and relearn it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'm curious then, if you were thinking about types of folks who would do well as a UX researcher, what do you think, makes you successful?
I think having a first passion for the space and empathy for users, right? So that's, I think, I would say table stakes. You need to be able to empathize with your users. You need to be an advocate for them. But then at the other end, you're also part of a big company and they have product and business goals. So knowing how to being mature enough to know how to balance those, right? Like between business goals and user needs without sacrificing one or the other. So I think that's a very, very nuanced skill, and it's sometimes hard to do. And sometimes there are trade-offs that you're not comfortable making, but you just have to. You have to be able to empathize, not just now with the users, with also your product and your XFN team, right? Because they have constraints that they're working with as well. So just being sort of cognizant of, yes, I know this is ideally this is how we'd like to do it, but there's so many different factors that we got to keep in mind. So it's not binary. Sometimes there's a lot of trade-offs. So I think someone who's successful would be someone who can maintain that balance.
Yeah, well, and have that empathy, like you're saying, for
Yeah.
customers, for users, for your collaborators. There's sort of empathy across the board. Will help you. And I'm curious if you could see someone going into UX for like the wrong reasons, right? Where they've got sort of okay, this is an idea of what this is and it's not going to work out. What comes to mind there?
Yeah, I mean, if you're, there's all kinds of researchers. Like there's a quant researcher, there's a qual researcher, there's just those who want to do more ethnography. And so just understanding like research, I mean, at least at Facebook, they expect you to be wholesome, like a product researcher, do what it takes to get the job done. Yes, we do have qual, quant, whatever, but it's you have to think beyond just the UX or the UI. Some people will just get stuck in that. It's think about it as an entrepreneur. If you own the product, what is the research that needs to be done? Which means, collaborating with a quant researcher, collaborating with your data scientist, collaborating with your marketing manager or market researcher, right? And getting that 360 on what's going to take to make this a successful product launch. So yeah, I mean, you should be comfortable dabbling in all those different. I'm not saying you have to be an expert, but at least know how to leverage. You have those partners, you have those resources. So don't go in thinking you can do this alone.
Well, and almost
So
taking that responsibility to have a holistic view instead of
absolutely.
niching in and saying, this is the one thing we're going to do, and this is
Yeah.
exactly the way we're going to do it,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
wouldn't land as well, right?
Right, right. And you mean you need to have good collaboration skills, if you will, and typically you'll ask yourself, like, oh, when they're interviewing me, they do all these behavioral questions. It's so ridiculous. Like, why would they need to ask these questions? But you know what? Truly, I can teach you a skill, but I cannot teach you how to work well with other people. That's a harder skill to inculcate, right, in somebody. So yeah, you're going to have to work with and learn to work with and be a team player, right, to be successful.
Well, and it is
So
something that we don't focus on as much in school, right? School is about domain knowledge and content. Be like, how do you work well with others? How do you build collaborative networks?
yeah, actually you'll be surprised, but the ATDE program that I referred to, they spend a lot of time, a big piece of that curriculum is devoted to doing team projects and doing successful team projects. And that's when you start learning and you get a little insight into, what your future world will look like when you have issues with your teammates and how do you resolve them. They expect you to resolve them on your own, anytime you face a conflict, what's your approach? So I think that program is designed really well. So
That's great. Gosh, more training for that earlier
yeah,
on would be much
yeah,
better. The number of us who land in the workforce and are like, wait a minute, what's going
I
on?
know.
This person says this and this person says this. What do I do?
I know everyone's driving their own agenda.
Yeah, it could be challenging. Nice. All right, good. Thank you for telling me about the sort of pros and cons. Last video, we'll just sort of wrap up.
Sounds good.